Hi, welcome to another Becoming Invaluable podcast. I'm Terry Lyles. My co-author, Steve Bowen, is with us today. So, Steve, it's great to have you. We love doing this, and we have our spotlight feature today of someone very special. And we talk about each chapter and what we're going to get into. So, Steve, I'm going to let you kind of kick that off, introduce our guest today that has been so helpful to us in the writing of this book. So, Steve, take it away and welcome to our program.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Terry, and welcome. This is Jennifer Potter-Brotman. You'll hear me call her Jen because I've known her for quite some time, and she's good with Jen. So, Jen, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So with everybody that's in our book, we like to say that, in the book, Becoming Invaluable, each chapter has a spotlight, as Terry was mentioning. And so Jen, her tattoo on her arm is 131. That's her page number. 130.
41.
Oh, excuse me. 130. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Did I say that wrong?
Yeah. Look at the page number.
Terry, help me out here.
We'll
I
make
think
sure
I
we
just
get her.
screwed that up. 141.
141. That's it. Well, she hasn't inked it yet.
141.
Okay. 141. So everybody gets one.
Okay, 141. I got too many. Yeah, that was our last. That was Dr. Ginger.
Yeah, exactly.
So Jen, you're 141, and we won't refer to you as that again. But I want everybody to know that I've known Jen for, I don't know, Jen. How many years has it been now?
Feels like 15 or something. Is that right?
It's
more than that, maybe.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I think that's about the right number, around 15, 16 years. And so Jennifer was one of the board members in the company that I created, MainPoint. And we got to know each other, prior to that through a gentleman by the name of Ed Pendergast was how we got introduced. And Jen lives in the Boston area, as do I. And so we really hit it off, and I was so happy because her orientation to leadership and sales leadership and marketing was so tremendous, and it has been invaluable to me. And so what I would also say is that Jen and I also had the pleasure of serving on another board together, and we had an interesting experience with that one. But Jen, I would like for you to give maybe a little bit more background on yourself. I'm talking about how I know you. Maybe you could share with the group and the audience a little of your background.
Sure. Well, I guess from back, I'm the eldest of 3 daughters, which is important because I grew up in a home. My father was a doctor. My mother came from a well-to-do family. She had all kinds of emotional challenges that she had to work through, demons to conquer, if you will. And so at a very, very early age, I developed this heightened sense of responsibility and feeling, because the home front was a little fragile and sometimes didn't feel quite rational in ways. So it gave me this very early kind of feeling of maybe emotional EQ and also, responsibility. It also gave me a lot of anxiety, which I've carried through my entire life and always tried to think, how do I turn that into a strength? Because it's there, right? It's omnipresent. Some very powerful things from my early childhood. My parents both parents very strong. My mother conquered all her issues, which I hugely admire. And very strong values, almost to a very high degree. My father was the kind of guy that said, he was a doctor, remember, if someone was asking X price for a house, that must be fair and that must be what you pay. And so I was an English major. I always wanted to be in publishing. So I started in publishing at a company called Little Brown, which was one of the top publishers at the time. And I get in there and I thought, well, this is great, but how do you get ahead? How do you get to that corner office? Because it looked to me like it was all seniority based. And they said, yeah, it's all how long you've been here. And so I quickly realized, well, that feels a little not good. So anyway, long story short, I met through just sort of circumstance a very cool company that was founded by Harvard MBAs that was really focused on studying leadership and what differentiated very effective, high-powered leaders from those that were moderate or not. And it just hit me. It's like, what a wonderful mission. So I joined that firm as an editor and stayed for a very long time, followed the founder as the CEO, and then we sold it to Pearson, the big publisher. Ironic, started in publishing and then ended up, and then left that when we sold. I stayed a little bit after we sold the firm, got into private equity, and then into the crazy but wonderful executive search business. So my career's had kind of multiple points to it, and I think of it in phases sometimes, and learnings in those different phases. But so that's just a little bit about my background.
Yeah, I think it's great. And that's why we wanted you in this chapter, because it's about vision, mission, servant leadership. And it was not by accident that Steve and I had these conversations chapter by chapter and thought, who would we put in this chapter that reflects what we're trying to write about in this chapter? So I'm glad you brought that up, because we were going to probably get there somehow. So that's really powerful that you're like legit servant leader by training and by experience. And that's why your story is really important to us.
Thank you.
Jen, it seems like we all have some experiences that, Terry calls them transitions in life, right? We all have this transitory moments through life that we carry with us from childhood all the way through, and still experiencing some, right? And so that's really interesting how the challenges your mother had were things that helped you realize how you might face some challenges. I'm just curious, when you think back through, because for everyone, she was also the CEO of one of the more successful training companies in out there. And that company was then acquired by private equity, if I have that story straight. So maybe as you climbed the ladder to the corporate office, so to speak, what are some of the big challenges you encountered there that might have also related back to those childhood experiences?
Oh, that's a great question. And we sold to Pearson, and then interestingly, private equity did come in. So you're
okay.
You're right about it. What were some of the challenges? I think, one of them was, it was a very academic, it was a for-profit company, but very academically oriented. And so a lot of the people were all about really doing the right thing and not always thinking commercially, not marrying those two things as well. And so early on, I observed that and I learned that, and I was always trying to navigate, how do we stay true to what we're doing, but also have a commercial spin on it. And I think that may have differentiated me a little bit. The other thing was, there was a lot of jockeying for power.
Yeah.
The way I navigated that was, and I probably had some naivete in the beginning, and then you learn, was, do your best work, always jump in when you see a hole, stand up if you don't agree. I mean, there were times I literally said, I'm not doing that if we don't get this funding. And it somehow, I stood out a bit from others. I also, there were times when I was thinking of leaving, because there were these very talented people above me. And I thought, I'm never going to, become the CEO with them there. And I actually resigned at one point. And the CEO came to me and he said, Jennifer, what are you doing? And I said, well, I love this company, but I'm ready to, go do more things. And he said, you're on the short list to be CEO. I said, well, nobody told me that. Nobody knew that. What I learned from that is, don't throw your toys out of the pram without leaning in and asking the question, right? Without saying.
Right.
And I ended up staying. And I don't know. There were some dysfunctional personalities, and I think I just always tried to sort of stay above it as best I could. And I think that got noticed by the board and
Interesting.
Yeah.
What I love about that, Jen, is that that's such a positive story, because here you are not knowing that you're on the short list to be CEO. I had kind of an opposite experience where very early in my career, I went to the VP general manager that ran this whole division for Corning. And I said, by the time I'm 30, at this time, I mean, we're going back 35, 40 years ago, maybe more than that. But we're going back that far. And I said, by the time I'm 30, I want to make $100,000. And he laughed in my face.
Mm,
And I was like, oh my gosh. In this case, I said to myself, I'm going to have to leave here
right.
in order to go beyond.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and it's so nice to hear that actually, that if it would have been the opposite story, I would, like you ended up staying.
I stated, yeah.
It's just interesting how these challenges come forward. You can't predict them all the time, right?
Oh, you cannot.
And I think one of the cool things about your story, Jen, is that, what you just shared is so important, because by following your vision and your mission statement, and then you got the vision and the mission of the company. So you had to listen to yourself, and then you had to be in a perspective of the company. And then sometimes there's a dichotomy and you have to start making decisions. And
Right.
that's true with any relationship,
Yes.
and it's being true with yourself.
That's very, very true. And you're always kind of calibrating. How am I doing in this, right? Am I being true to myself? Am I learning from how I'm handling things? And that's the journey part, right, of becoming a leader. And it never ends, right?
No, it never ends. And I think, and I'll ask Steve to jump back in. I think the cool thing about servant leadership, to me, we all have our own definitions, I'm sure. But to me, being a servant is very humble, very intentional, and pragmatic even, but also decisive. I mean,
Yes.
you can't be wishy-washy in leadership. Leadership has to be taken control of. Somebody has to make hard decisions, like
Right.
Steve was saying about himself and you, and I've had to do it, and our upbringing brings us to that. But I love the fact that you shared that type of leadership is what we consider, I believe, servant leadership, which means we have to sacrifice something I really want or need right now to do what's best. But at some point, it's like, am I sacrificing to the point of my own detriment or the detriment of the company? So there's this, as you said, this ebb and flow of how you lead as a servant.
Right. Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I think we all face those challenges too, of family, other relationships, and business, right? And I find that people run around talking about, work-life balance. Terry and I don't subscribe to that phrase. We subscribe to work-life synergy, because the scale keeps moving, right? At least to me. I don't know how it was. How was that experience for you?
It was, well, I was fortunate in that the company the consulting company in leadership development was half the management team were female. And the CEO was a pretty enlightened.
In what period of time are we talking?
Let's see, I started there in 1978, maybe.
Wow.
That's he was very ahead of his time. Very, very, really impressive leader. But he was also smart, because and I remember him saying this at one point, he knew women would work 10 times harder just to, navigate through. So he was no dope, right? I mean, and we were pretty crazy committed. And when I talk to some of the younger people today, men and women, they don't always operate like I did. And they may not be wrong, right? It was just how it was back then.
Right.
So Steve, now I've blanked on your question now that I got myself diverted there.
The work-life synergy and how that moves around. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had to work on it. I was fortunate. My husband, when I took the job leading Europe for this company, he quit his job. We made a family decision to do that. And so I had a husband who was very supportive and stay at home. I always thought of my scorecard in life as having multiple things. So there was the work, there was the family and friends. And I always, and my husband Judd and I would talk about it. How are we doing on this balance? And not work-life balance, just thinking about it in terms of how were things integrated and were we doing what we needed to for each other and our family? And we navigated that pretty well. There were times when the balance was a little out of sync, but I don't think you avoid that. I think that's just sort of how it goes. And if it's out of sync for too long, then you have to make decisions. But I think I was pretty fortunate in that regard. It's not, so this is another one. People always struggle and talk about it. And for me, it wasn't really a struggle.
Right.
Yeah, you were more like in a flow state of those values that you and your husband put together, work, family, friends. And it's like a pendulum, I consider it. We're right. Swinging back and forth. So if you start swinging too far, you're going to swing too far that way. So you have to keep this kind of slow, steady alignment and synergy that Steve and I talk about, which I think you're describing is it doesn't have to be like, okay, I have to do work now. Oh, I have to do family. It's like, we're one person navigation of all these things, which we call Navigotiate. We're doing that every day with all the things in our lives.
And it's integrated. I mean, when I went to lead Europe, calendars everybody could see. And I put on my calendar Alexander's soccer game, my whatever, so people could see, because I wanted to model it. I wanted others to do it. And it was a good way to do it.
That's good.
And I think that aspect of, whatever your partner, your spouse, whatever that is in life today, I will never forget when I started Mainpoint and I told Deb we were going to bet everything we had to do it. And she said, just don't lose my van, because if the kids and I have to, we can live in there for a few weeks.
Sounds like Deb. She's so funny.
Yeah, but that's
commitment. That's commitment to a vision and a mission.
Well, it is. That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, and it has to do with doing what you love, right? I mean, I always loved what I was doing. And if I didn't, that's a whole different deal.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things that, excuse me, seems to come up in leadership all the time is people struggle with getting to, I'm going to use the term root cause. That sounds like there's a problem. I don't mean always a problem, but leaders seem to have a way of learning and finding out how to get to what really matters. I'm just curious some of your views on that.
And how to get what really matters. I think it's reading all the surrounding context is so important to me. Makes me crazy at times, because if I'm in a meeting or in a company, I'm operating with every single antenna out possible. Like, what's the strategy of the company? What's the context? What's the political thing? What's going? And because I'm always synthesizing all of that, driving myself crazy at times, but synthesizing, you can then it's like the forest for the trees. You can see what are the really serious things versus the noise. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, Steve. I don't see things. If I enter the door into one room in a house, for example, and you could say, oh, this is a neat and tidy room. I'm curious about the rest of the house, right? And what does that tell you? And how do you then know, well, is the neatness, tidiness of this room really reflective, or is it a one-off? And so it's just trying to get the holistic picture of things to then be able to say, this is what's important, and this is what I'm going to focus on. And I've spent my life trying to figure out how to do that better, how to do it faster. Right. How to do it more efficiently. And sometimes it's asking others, here's how I'm reading the situation. What have I got right? What have I got wrong? And amazing what comes back when you do that.
And I think you made a really important statement there about asking others. I think some people think leadership is about having all the answers, always knowing what to do. And you know what? Some of the best presidents we've had in our country here in America, all of them that were great or considered great or the best, had phenomenal cabinet of people around them that advised them.
Yeah. Well, and it comes back to really knowing what your strengths are. And this is what I love about the invaluable concept, right? Because it's a positive kind of a look at the world. Where are you having impact? How do you know you're having impact? And if you're focused on that and you're focused on where your strengths are, then you surround yourself with people who complement you, maybe push you in ways you need to be pushed. And then you have a network of people who you go to. And I have an amazing network of people, and I'll dial them up and say, this is how I'm seeing something, push back on me. And they do it with me. And I think you get to much better outcomes. You learn about yourself and you help others in that process because they seek you out because they know you're going to operate in the same way, right? In terms of, so yeah, I really believe in seeking others, not to the detriment of making decisions, right? There can be a fine line there if you keep getting input and trying to get consensus. There are times you say, I need to get enough of the lay of the land, and then we got to move.
Right. Yeah, and there's sometimes you have to make a decision right away, and there's not time to get consulting, opinions. But that's what a leader is too. A leader knows when to drive and knows to be a pilot and when to be a co-pilot for a moment. And you switch the power and the authority over to the people around you to help you make those good decisions. I know Steve and I talked a lot about this in the book. In this chapter 5, about vision and mission. And sometimes people get those mixed up.
They totally do.
We lose our vision. Therefore, the mission gets kind of blurry. And now we focus on strategy versus the mission. And it can really get sideways real quick.
Well, and the other thing people miss is individuals, right? As a leader, you have to navigate, okay, at this point in time in the business, do I need to be a tougher, forward-looking, decisive leader? At this point, I need to give more care and feeding because people are exhausted and the numbers are great. And then down to individuals, because people are motivated, as you all know, in very different ways. And so it's not one size fits all, for sure.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this, Jen, in terms of in the book, as you know, we have the triangle, and in the triangle, we talk about mental and physical health.
Yep.
And then we talk about mental and physical strength, which develops ourself to get to the worth at the top. And then we have willitude and navigotiation along the way, the two words that Terry and I made up. And then when I think of this, and I'd just like to get your perspective of how did you manage all of this first for yourself, right? Because you have to manage all of that for yourself in order to be able to lead others too. And that's one of the things that I see is sometimes leaders haven't always paid attention to making sure they manage all of that for themselves. And then the leadership might not last. How did you go about doing that?
Well, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but it's something that is a core guiding light for me, which is I think a lot about energy forces. And I think I categorize people into 3 different types. So they're the positive energy forces. Those are the people that when you spend time with them, you leave more energized, right? You're uplifted. You've had a great conversation. You just feel really good. Then there are the neutrals, which, was fine. Nothing good, nothing bad. And then there are the negative energy people. They're the people that suck energy from you. Right. And I decided a long time ago, I wanted to be a positive energy force. And it feeds into being invaluable and a whole bunch of other things. It takes a lot of intentionality to do it. But if you think about every interaction, and it's not just in business, it's literally every interaction, are you bringing positive energy to people? Doesn't mean you're not going to give them tough advice, but are you a positive energy? I'll give you this stupid little example because it just sticks in my brain. One time I was trying to get a cab in Boston and there was no queue. It was like people were just, up and down sidewalks for like 2 blocks, not in any line, just on the edge of the sidewalk. And so we all had our hands out, right? Everyone's trying to get the cab. And this cab literally went by about 20 people and pulled up in front of me. And I got in the cab and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And then I said, "I'm just curious, why did you stop in front of me when there were all these other people?" And he said to me, "You were the only one who was smiling."
Yeah, that's powerful.
All right.
And I thought, well, there it is. It's a little example, but it's how your impact on people by positive, and it is a big deal. And so back to Steve, your question. So then you become, you just become more aware of where are people, and how do you navigate that, but being positive, being a positive energy force, because people don't move, don't get inspired, don't want to be part of anything if they're not feeling that.
Yeah,
I don't.
You said something really powerful there, because we talk about in the book, the difference between inspire and expire. And I use this a lot in training and coaching with people, because you either walk in a room and you give inspiration or oxygen in the room, or you suck it out of the room. You're an
Exactly
extrovert.
same thing.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, because it's so, and you can see it on someone's face. You can see it in their body language. You got a cab ride because you were smiling. I mean, who knew? That's all it took.
Who knew? It's such a goofy thing, really. But Steve, the other thing is to replenish that. So that takes time and a lot of, so for me, the way I replenish is exercise, reading, a really wonderful husband, son, and friends, and some meditation. Because, if you're not in a place where you can be fully present and you're not going to be good for yourself or anyone else. So and that's been a long process for me. I don't think I always had that right. I think I I think I took it internally. I think I made myself sick at times, not physically sick maybe, but just the stress was at a level. And, I learned to compartmentalize. I think in the early years, let's say we had an interaction and maybe it didn't go so well. Maybe someone didn't want to buy the big contract I had, and I would stew on it, right? I would just stew and replay. And, I had to learn to say, okay, what do you learn from that? Get the learnings, be self-critical, and then move it along, just move it along. And that has been a life journey for me. And I've gotten much, much better. I'm not at mastery level, but I've gotten much better.
I don't think any of us are masters, really. If you really step back, we're always trying to master. And I think that's the beauty of learning and growing and reading and,
it is.
Just interfacing with yourself. And I think it's really powerful. So Steve, as we're starting to wrap up here in a few, so this whole chapter with you, Jennifer, was really interesting to us, and it really for me as well, because I love the concept of leadership and how many fragmented views there are on leadership. So leave us with something that, if it was one or two things that you did as a leader that you believe set you apart from others.
I think it was total focus on the external market in terms of where clients are, what they need, and how you build long-term relationships based on trust so that you can truly be advisory, and do that with grace and bring people internally along by challenging them, supporting them, and aligning those things. And I think when people, if you were to go out and ask people about me, they would say, strong commercial kind of ability, unbelievable care about clients and how you overserve. And the same applies to people, right? So, and I think the other thing is you have to cut the cord, right? If someone isn't performing and it isn't the right environment, they're going to be better off and they're going to continue to grow if you make those decisions early. And again, you do them with grace, you do them with positive energy. I mean, I've probably laid off more people than I want to admit. But you do it for two reasons. You do it because if they're not performing, they're probably not happy. And so as a leader, you're not doing the job either for the company, the clients, or them. And I think keeping that all in mind, I think people lose the plot on that. They get hung up on, I can't make that move with someone. I can't, and doing it with speed.
That's good. Steve?
Thinking about that, you make me think of one. I'm not going to name the person because I don't want to put anybody on the spot or anything, but I think maybe the best compliment I ever got And it wasn't at an easy time in Main Point's history. You know, we went through, you know, Jen, from being on the board, up and down, but growing, right?
Yep.
In one of those down moments, an individual came up to me and said, boy, you're really tough to work for, but we know you care.
Yeah.
And that was maybe the first time that I really realized, like you're saying, that this, back to your positive energy people, your negative energy people, that hey, maybe I was navigating this okay, right? I don't know if I was doing it great, but maybe I was navigating this okay, because it was one of the, I'll never forget that. I don't think, and I think leaders don't strive for those moments. Those are moments that happen from, at least in my experience, a lot of those happen from some difficult circumstances
I think
that you remember so well.
Yep. No, that's such a great example. Such a great example.
Yeah. And I think as we're all leaders at work, at home, even with friendships, because sometimes friends need leadership, you know, some they want to listen to them. They need someone to, I have people, like we all do, that I can call and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm confused about this thing. I just don't, because, you know, like all of you probably, people call me like I know what I'm doing. And it's like,
I know.
I'm lost. I don't even know where I'm at. You know, it's like, but I don't tell them that, because, you know, that would freak them out. But people, and I'll end with this because we got to get out of here soon. But I think leaders, strong leaders, attract other strong leaders.
Oh,
when you find other strong leadership, you can be vulnerable, because, you know, we praise down and we complain up. So you got to find somebody strong as you or stronger that you can really say, I don't know what I'm doing right now. What should I do? I think that's really cool dynamic in leadership.
Yeah. And what Steve said about the caring piece is trust is the key to all these relationships. If someone trusts that you care and you're trying to do the right thing, that magic happens.
Yeah. Well, that's,
and I'll close out.
Go ahead, Steve.
I want to just close out with one last thought. You know, Jen, we had, and I think what we're talking about is tied to something we've heard from all of our folks when we were interviewing you for the book of, you know, failure is just not an option. Now, that doesn't mean you don't fail. I mean, I like to say I failed way more than I succeeded. But like you said, you move on, you learn, and it's water under the bridge, right? And I think that's just such a powerful message, because so many people hang on to things.
Hang on. Yep.
And I'm so happy to have you on here. You know, I'm so happy that we've had this relationship for these past 15, 16 years. And I know it's going to continue.
Well, I hope so. And I congratulate you guys on this book, because I think the way you've picked it up and framed it is really powerful and refreshing. And it had me looking at my sort of whole background with a different lens and got me thinking. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Terry, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, so people can find us at becominginvaluable.com, and our books are available everywhere. So Amazon is probably the go-to for most people, but it books a million, you know, wherever you buy books. Barnes and Noble. Yeah, it's Kindle. We have our audio version that we're releasing very quickly here that's completed, which we're really excited about. So becominginvaluable.com is how you find us. Steve, as always, thank you for doing this with me and doing this, you know, together. And Jennifer, for you being on today and being in chapter 5. And you're always going to be number 141. It's just a number, but we thank you for your contribution in being invaluable to help us share your story with ours of others who are becoming invaluable. So thank both of you for being here today. So becominginvaluable.com. Thank you for being here today, and enjoy the listening and the viewing, and we will talk again soon.